What's up, guys? This is Teddy. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This video, I'm going to be talking about the chain of responsibility pattern. And if you've ever worked on any type of framework, and I've seen this in JavaScript, I think I've seen this in Angular, and I see this a lot in .NET. If you ever see this, if you ever see .next, if you ever see anything where you're bringing in a function or you're bringing in some type of framework, and at the bottom of the framework they have you use this .next, that is an indication of the chain of responsibility pattern. And it's not really, the concept of it really is not complicated at all. It's literally logic that has been objectified. And I'll explain to you a little bit like what that means. So I know you've heard of an if statement. I know you know how an if statement works, but what if you could have some type of logic, and instead of an if statement, you are using these .next patterns to control the flow of execution? And it's almost like you're turning a if statement into an object. You're objectifying, I like to use that term, you're objectifying a if statement. It's almost like a linked list too, in that this .next is how you're chaining on these objects and executing these objects based on this .next. So if one piece of logic completes successfully or doesn't complete successfully, it moves on to the next object. And that's really it. And in this one, we're going to be building another fake network utility. And what this network utility is going to try to, this network utility, remember, all of these network utilities are fake. We're not going to build like an actual real one. We're just going to kind of, build a fake one. Is the whole idea of this network utility is, first, we're going to try and do some type of SSH request. And you don't even need to know what any of these networking terms mean. They're literally just made up. But first, this network utility is going to try to SSH out. And if it can't SSH, it's going to try and send a ping. And if it can't send a ping, it's going to send an ARP request. And if you're looking at this, you're going to say, well, Teddy, what kind of network utility are we building here? This sounds kind of sketchy, but it's literally nothing to it. I'm not going to teach you guys how to do any type of sketchy thing. It's just literally just fake. Remember that. I'm never going to teach anybody how to be doing, sketchy stuff like that. But we're going to go in here. First thing, we're just going to make our folder just to kind of separate out these folders. Chain of responsibility. So chain of responsibility. And then next thing that we want to do is we're going to make an interface. So interface, and we're just going to call this thing iChain. And we're not even going to have a class for the chain either. It's just going to be one interface. Excuse me. And it's going to be, it's going to have our fake network request in it. So we're going to go here, and we're also going to build out a network model. I'll talk more about why we're going to be putting a network model in here, as opposed to just maybe passing in the IP address or passing in the information that we need into our objectified if statements. But for now, just kind of follow along and I'll explain it as I go. And then here we're going to have our set next, and I don't expect you to know what any of these are right now, but like I said, as we kind of go along, it's going to make more sense. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a network model, and this network model is going to have, let me see, network model is going to have just two properties. We're going to have our IP address, and it's make this a string. Then it's going to have our IP. Then we're going to go down here. Then we're going to have a bool, and this is going to have a success identifier in it for our if statement. Since we don't actually have if statements in it. Well, we do have if statements, but the logic isn't really dependent on, or the going from object to object in our chain isn't going to depend on actual if statements, so to speak. And we need a way to show success, or we need a way for the network or to actually control the chain. And once again, if it doesn't make sense, just kind of follow along. All right, so we're going to go here. A lot of these design patterns are getting more complicated. So just like a lot of stuff in coding, it's not going to make a lot of sense at first, and you just kind of got to grit through it. So just bear with me here. So we've made this network model, and this network model is going to be what we're going to pass into our chains. And our chains are going to be classes that are going to enact different types of objects depending on the send arp. So let's go back here. So we're going to make a send SSH class, a send ping class, and a send arp class. And this is these. So if you were to just have a simple if statement, like you had one if statement, and then within that if statement, you had a bunch of code that would do the send SSH, and then a send ping statement that would be within another else statement, and you had another send arp, and you had all of this code that was housed in like these huge if statements. That would be terrible. That would be ugly. So that's the reason why we objectify it with the chain of responsibility. Instead of having like these really long, nasty if statements, what we're going to do is we're going to put them inside of objects, and we're going to use interfaces, and we're going to use the I chain in order to control the flow and where the next class that's going to be done. So we're going to go in here, and obviously the first one that we want to do is we want to do the send SSH. So, and we name them, we're going to name these classes after verbs instead of actual nouns, because these are like almost like verb classes, since they're pseudo if statements, if you will. Then we're going to have the send request, and then we're going to have the next chain. So the send request, we're doing so the send SSH here, and I'll just kind of bring this down right here. So the send SSH is a request, the send ping is a request, the send arp is a request, and then the set next is going to be how you're going to link your chains together. The send or the set next is almost like the reference to the next object that we are going to actually send. And whenever you have a set next, you always have this type of pattern right here. So first thing, we actually need to bring in our chain. So we're going to go private, we're going to go iChain, and then we're going to go next. We have that right there. Okay, and then for our send request, let's worry about that after we worry about this one. So whenever we set the chain, we just have this right here. So we have set next and this dot chain, and we're going to pass in our send ping. So we're going to go send ping. So watch this. And our send SSH, what's going to happen is that whenever we actually go to execute this, we're going to set our send ping to this next chain right here. And watch this. This is probably the coolest part. So you go in here, we're going to pass in a request, we're going to pass in a success, and if the success is equal to false, which in this case we're going to, we'll write something like send right line, and this will be like send SSH failed. So if we're trying to get out of the network and our SSH fails, we're going to write this, we're going to console log this, and then we're going to say sending ping, just like this. And then what we're going to go down here is we'll go else, and if it does execute, we'll go send right line. So if this is a success, then the chain's going to end, which it's not going to in this case, and then we'll say send SSH success. But in this case, this piece of code isn't even going to execute because we're going to pass in a false, because I want to show you guys what's going to happen to go in the next chain. Like if the SSH is successful, it's not going to go to the next chain, and you're not really going to learn anything. But we want it to go to the next chain. But you may be wondering, like, well, how do we get to the next chain? Watch this. This is even cooler. So we're going to go send request, and then we're going to go request. just like that. So the next one, it's the next one in the chain. So if it is not a success, it's going to go, oh, not a success. Now we go to the next one, and then that's when we go to the send ping. And we're literally going to do the same. These classes are going to look almost identical. And you will see this code a lot in code bases. And whenever you see this, you'll be like, oh, okay, now I know what's going on. This is a chain of responsibility pattern. So we're going to go in here. We're going to go down here and make this look better because this looks like doo-doo. And we're going to bring this back. Bring this right here. Bring this one back. And actually, let's just, never mind. I'm going to go back. This should not have done this, but I did it. So we're going to go in here, and then we're going to bring in our iChain. Then our iChain, we're going to implement our interface, and we're going to get rid of this. Then we're going to go in here. So go here, and then we can just change all of these out, and we can go in here, and of course, we can bring in our send.next. And we're getting an error because we still haven't brought in our chain. So we're going to go iChain is equal to, let's see, next. Then we're going to go in here. So let me see. And change this out because it's not an actual SSH. So we're going to go send ping. And if this one doesn't work, we're going to send an ARP. And if it does work, we're going to say send ping success. So we go down in here. Then we're going to do the exact same thing for this one. So we're going to go in here, and then this is going to be the last link in the chain. And if nothing passes, that's when we're going to do the actual send ARP. And a send ARP is a request to get the MAC table. And if you don't know, once again, if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. And we're going to go ahead, bring in our chain. So iChain. So go in here, and we're going to go send request. So here, and we're just going to paste in all of this code so it looks a little bit better. And then down here, because this is the last link in the chain, we actually need to do a null check. Otherwise, it's not going to, otherwise we're going to get an error. And also I need to bring in the next part of the chain. So we're going to go private.iChain is equal to next link in the chain. And then if next is not equal, or is not equal to null, that's when we're going to send the request. And so bring that over a little bit. Then if it does fail, which it's going to in this case, it's just going to say .writeLine, and we'll say network transmission failed. Shutting down. Shutting down. Just like that. Or I'll just say terminating. That's a good one. So here, and that is going to be the last link in the chain. And we also need to implement the last part over here. And let me see. So this dot next is equal to the next chain. Okay, so that is pretty much it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go in here and we're going to actually execute it. So we're going to go iChain. And because all of these objects are inheriting from our chain, send. Okay, so the first one that we were sending is we try to send an SSH. So we'll go here. And now we actually need to new up the chains. Otherwise, they're not going to work. If the objects don't exist in the actual computer, then nothing's going to work. So we're going to go iChain. We're going to go object 3 is equal to new send ARP. Then we go down here. We're going to go object 1 is equal to set next. And we have to set these. Otherwise, if we don't set these, it's not gonna be able to go to the next one because it doesn't know what the next object is. And I'll show you when I step through this. I'll show you like why and like why it's actually doing this. And for some reason, we need to do that because it's a method. We're not newing anything up. So we're gonna go object 2, then we're gonna go set next, and we're going to pass in our object 3, and IntelliSense somehow knows what we're about to do. Then we're gonna pass in our network model. So once again, I made a network model, and I could have just done this. Like I could have just done it so that I passed in the send request. And let me actually just new up this real quick, and then I'll show you what I could have done. But it actually makes more sense to pass in an object, and that in itself is almost like a good programming practice too. And I'm about to release a refactoring course here in a little bit, and if you just pass in this right here, like watch this. Like I could have just, instead of passing in this network model request, like I just passed this into here. And I could have just done this where I passed in the IP address and I passed in false to make everything fail, but it's good programming practice to actually pass in an object as opposed to just passing in like a bunch of strings like I did. So that's kind of the reason I did that instead of just passing in this by itself, because it's kind of good coding practice, and we're doing a design patterns course, so we might as well start following correct design patterns. And I got an error. So let me see here. Send request. Network model is less accessible. So I think it has to do with this public. Okay, so that went away. So chain of responsibility, let's see what we got here. So we're going down here. It's going to new up all those nice little objects that we have. Now we're going to go into the very first object. Remember that we're going to go into this first object, and we're going to set the chain. And when you set the chain, it's just going to go up here, and it's going to insert it to the top of the class. So it's going to go up here. It's going to insert that to the top of the class. So kind of like I always say, it's almost like putting it in your, the backpack for the class is almost like the top of the class. Like whenever you see something assigning like that, it's almost like in a strange world, in the computer programming world, the backpack is like on the top of the class. Like if you were just to be like, if everybody just walked around and had like a backpack on top of their head for some reason, and they just stored items that they needed on top of their head, that's like the computer programming world. It's kind of a goofy analogy, but you get what I mean. So it's going to go do the same exact thing. It's going to set that chain. It's going to set that reference to that new object. It's going to put the object it needs on top of its head. It's going to declare, or it's going to assign it. And now we're ready to rock. So all of this stuff right here was just set up, and this is just set up to a certain extent as well too. And I'll just step through this, and then we're going to go in here. It's going to assign the IP. It's going to assign false to the success, because in our fake networking model, it's going to be a failure. And then we're going to go through here, and this is where the actual chain is. And notice here, like we don't have to do any more requests after this. Like once this part actually works, like this is going to take care of itself. We've just done a bunch of setup. Now we can actually go through and begin to like actually execute the chain. So I accidentally stepped over it. So we'll go here, and this is where all the magic's going to happen. So first things first, it's going to go in here. Our success is equal to false. And what's going to happen is it's going to say the fake SSH failed. Now we're going to send a ping. And because we put our object up in our backpack right here, we've got our object that we can actually play around with. We're going to send the next request. Our next request is a failure. And if you look here, now we've got our next, and it's a send ARP, and we're going to go into our send ARP class, console write, failure. It's a null because there's no object up in here, because there's nothing else left in the chain. So we put a next, and then what's going to happen is it's going to say this network transmission failed. We've run out of stuff in the chain of responsibility. We're done here, and our program is going to execute out. And look at how beautiful that is. Send SSH failed, sending ping. Send ping failed, sending ARP. Send SSH, or send S, I think I just forgot to change this. Hold on. I forgot to change the SSH to ARP here. ARP sending. We're not sending another one, so it's just gonna say send ARP failed, and then it's just gonna say network transmission failed. And let me get that breakpoint out of here, and let me just make sure that it works. And yep, there we go. So the SSH failed, sending ping failed, sending ARP, send ARP failed. Then it's going to hit that null check. It's going to say the network transmission failed and terminating, and our program ends. Anyway, that's going to be the chain of responsibility. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching.